We tend to think of history as, well, history, a story that's already been written, with all the facts set in stone. But what if those stones could talk? And what if the story they told was completely different from the one in our textbooks? That's what we're getting into today. Some of history's biggest mysteries, where the official story, well, it's really just the opening chapter. I mean, think about the Great Pyramids of Giza. They're like the poster child for ancient, monumental, and, you'd think, totally understood history, right? For literally centuries, we've had one main story about how they were built. But what if that story's got it all wrong? There's this really compelling alternative theory that says we might be looking at the whole thing backwards. It's a huge debate, so let's dig in. So here's the big question, and it sounds simple, but trust me, the implications are absolutely massive. Did the ancient Egyptians really carve millions of multi-ton stones by hand? Or did they use a much, much smarter method? Something that looks a lot like modern concrete. Okay, so on one side, you have the official story. You know the one. Millions of enormous blocks, some weighing as much as 15 tons, were supposedly cut from quarries with insane precision, then dragged for miles, and somehow hauled up these gigantic ramps. I mean, it's a logistical nightmare that still makes modern engineers scratch their heads. But then you have this other idea. It argues the blocks weren't carved at all. They were cast. Imagine workers just carrying buckets of a liquid stone mixture up the pyramid and pouring it into molds, creating the blocks right there on the spot. Way simpler, right? Now, the key to this whole alternative theory is actually pretty brilliant and surprisingly simple. We're not talking about aliens or lost magic here. The idea is that the Egyptians just took a technology they were already experts in, grinding grain, and applied it to rock. Think about it. They could pulverize local limestone into a powder, mix it with some natural binders like clay and salt, and voila, they've created a synthetic, pourable rock. It's an elegant chemical solution, not some impossible feat of brute force. Okay, so is there any actual proof for this? Well, this is where it gets really interesting. For one, chemical analysis of some pyramid blocks has turned up minerals with a high water content, something you just don't find in natural limestone. And then there's the physical evidence, like what you're seeing right here. This is a fragment supposedly taken from high up on the Great Pyramid. Look at that fine mesh-like pattern on the surface. Proponents of the concrete theory say that's a dead giveaway. It's the imprint from a mat that was used to line the mold. How else do you explain that on a naturally quarried stone? It's tough. And this idea that they were casting things might not have stopped with the pyramids. Take a close look at this famous unfinished bust of Queen Nefertiti. The official story is that it was carved out of a single, solid block of super hard quartzite. But do you see that? That distinct vertical line running right down the center of her face? That's a seam. And a seam like that is a classic sign of casting something in a two-part mold. It's the kind of thing you'd normally polish away at the very end. The fact that it's still there on an unfinished piece, that's a pretty powerful clue that maybe a lot more Egyptian art was cast, not carved. All right, let's switch gears. We're moving from a mystery of ancient engineering to a mystery of, well, the human mind, or maybe something else entirely. We're leaving behind the solid evidence of stone and diving into events that seem to have no logical explanation at all. We're talking about poltergeists. The word poltergeist is German, and it literally translates to noisy spirit or noisy ghost. And honestly, that's a perfect name for it. We're talking about a whole range of bizarre physical stuff. Unexplained noises, objects flying across the room, doors slamming shut, sometimes even physical attacks. What's really interesting, though, is that unlike your typical haunted house story, poltergeist activity doesn't seem to be tied to a place. It's almost always centered around one specific person. In fact, paranormal researcher Jellan Sherwood broke the whole thing down into 5 stages that tend to escalate over time. It usually starts small, Stage 1 is just sensory stuff, weird smells, or that creepy feeling that you're being watched. Then it gets communicative, whispers, groans. Stage 3 is when things get physical. Objects move, doors open. By stage 4, it's deliberate. Things are being thrown to scare you. And in the final, most terrifying stage, it can get aggressive. People report being bitten, scratched, or finding threatening messages. So the big question is, what's causing all this chaos? And the explanations are polar opposites. On the one hand, you have the classic paranormal explanation. It's an external entity, a ghost, a demon, something not of this world. But then there's a totally different take from the world of parapsychology. They call it recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, or RSPK for short. The idea here is that there's no ghost at all. Instead, the agent is a living person, often a teenager, who is unconsciously projecting all their repressed anger or trauma out into the physical world. So the noisy ghost isn't a spirit from the outside, it's a kind of psychic storm coming from the inside. Okay, from the world of psychic phenomena, let's jump right back into physical objects. Because all around the globe, archaeologists have dug up things that, well, they just don't make sense for their time period. They're called out-of-place artifacts, and they totally challenge what we think ancient people were capable of. Let's do a quick fire round of a couple of the most famous ones. First up, we've got the Quimbaya artifacts. These little gold figures were found in Colombia, and they're about 1,000 years old. Now, the official explanation is that they're zoomorphic, which is just a fancy way of saying they're supposed to be stylized birds or insects. But just look at them. I mean, really look. They've got what looks exactly like a vertical tail fin, stable wings, even a fuselage. To a lot of people, these don't look like birds at all. They look like little models of airplanes. So what are we looking at here? Stylized insects or proof that an ancient culture somehow understood aerodynamics? It's a heck of a question. All right, next we have the Baghdad Battery. This thing was found near Baghdad back in the 1930s. On the outside, it's just a 2,000-year-old clay pot. But it's what's inside that's so weird. There's a copper cylinder, and inside of that, there's an iron rod. So what was this thing for? The mainstream theory is pretty boring. Maybe it was just a container for sacred scrolls. But get this. If you fill that pot with something acidic, like vinegar or grape juice, that combination of iron and copper creates a galvanic cell. It becomes a simple battery. It could generate a small electric current, maybe just enough for something like electroplating jewelry with a thin layer of gold. So, did an ancient civilization discover electricity 2,000 years before we officially invented it? So we've looked at massive pyramids, spooky psychic events, and artifacts that just shouldn't exist. And it all kind of brings us back to the same fundamental question. What do we do with evidence that just doesn't fit the history we thought we knew? You can see the pattern, right? In every one of these mysteries, there's this incredible tension. It's the accepted story versus a really unsettling possibility. Were the pyramids built with carved stone or poured concrete? Are poltergeists actual spirits or just intense human psychology? Are these artifacts just ritual art, or are they glimpses of some kind of lost technology? It's always the official history clashing with a possibility that could change everything. And it forces us to question our own assumptions about what was possible in the past. And that really brings us to the final big question. Is history a settled story, all wrapped up and finished? Or is it a living mystery, just waiting for someone to reopen the case? I think the easy thing to do is to just accept the official story. The much harder, but maybe more rewarding path is to keep asking questions, to look at the weird stuff, the anomalies, and to wonder, is that really the whole story? Maybe the point of all these mysteries isn't about finding a single right answer. Maybe it's about realizing that the past was way more complex, way more ingenious, and honestly, just a whole lot stranger than we ever give it credit for.